Meanwhile, we're going to start our panel Q&A. So throughout this panel, each panelist will introduce themselves, their experience, their story, and how they got to where they are today. Then you guys will have a chance to ask your questions directly to Palwasha, who will be facilitating the discussion. And please send your questions directly to her in the chat so that it doesn't get lost in the general chat to all attendees. So I'll pass the mic to Palwasha and the panelists.
Amazing. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Palwasha. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm one of the conference coordinators here at Future Lawyers this year. And I'm going to be moderating our youth activist panel. So the purpose of this panel is to introduce you to some of our amazing youth activists who work across the social justice realm to give you the opportunity to see how you can truly make a difference in your communities. Many of these activists started their journey at quite a young age and continue to do so and continue to create such a great impact in their community while balancing their school, personal, and work lives. So before we begin, I'd like to quickly introduce our 4 panelists for this evening: Isabella, Charlene, Ella, and Rachel. Isabella is an 18-year-old activist majoring in political science at Queen's University. She's an avid intersectional feminist, climate activist, and public speaker, who has been featured for her activism on numerous publications. She's also an advocate for the survival of her heritage as a Macanese Canadian. Her main passion lies in the menstrual activism realm, through which she founded nonprofit organization Bleed the North in March of 2020. Next, we have Ella. Ella is an English climate youth activist who works on a national and international level for the Fridays for Future movement to fight climate change since 2018. Alongside other youth throughout the world, she's continued to pressure leaders and lawmakers to act on climate change and was named one of Canada's most inspirational climate leaders by the British Columbia Youth Council in 2021. Next, we have Charlene, who's a 17-year-old intersectional rights activist and advocate. After single-handedly representing the 95,000+ residents of her city, she successfully appeared as a delegate to her mayor and city councillors to implement sustainable policies. Due to her involvement, she has starred in CitizenKid docuseries, where she taught viewers about the importance of youth leadership by demonstrating her own initiatives. Finally, we have Rachel, who is a Chinese-Malaysian youth activist pursuing an honors Bachelor of Social Sciences degree at the University of Ottawa, specializing in conflict studies and human rights and minoring in Indigenous studies. Rachel is a member of multiple Amnesty International Canada specialized teams and is the co-president at Amnesty International U Ottawa. She uses her lived experiences to fuel this passion for positive change and recently has become a defining part of her advocacy work. So with all of that being said, let's please give a warm welcome to all 4 of our panelists in the chat or through reactions. So Isabella, Charlene, Ella, and Rachel, thank you so much for joining us on this panel today and taking the time out of your busy schedules to talk to us a little bit about your journey as an activist. So to get us started, I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to introduce yourselves a little further with your pronouns and what organizations you're a part of in more depth. So I'll pass it on to Isabella, who will get us started off.
Absolutely. First off, thank you so much to Future Lawyers for putting on such an incredible conference. And I'm so honored to be able to speak alongside so many incredible activists who are all so inspiring. As mentioned, my name is Isabella. I use she, her pronouns. I am the president and founder of Bleed the North. Bleed the North is a youth-led nonprofit committed to ending period poverty and period stigma in Ontario. So that is where most of my activism lies. And outside of that, I am also currently serving in the Social Issues Commission as a manager at Queen's. So very exciting.
Nice. All right. Great to see you all today. My name is Charlene Rocha. My pronouns are also she, her. I'm the president of e-NABLE Toronto, and what I do is I 3D print prosthetics for those in need. My activism really started with environmental activism, but as I start going more into the workforce and thinking more about university, I really want to be able to combine technology with activism, and that's currently my goal. Again, like Palwasha said, I've been really involved with environmental activism for a really long time, and I really like public speaking. But now I really enjoy going to these events and talking to so many other young people and hearing their ideas of how they want to change the world as well.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Ella. I use she, her pronouns, got the French ones in there too for all my Frenchies because I work on the national and international stage with Rise for Future. So a lot of that is bilingual. So it's kind of just automatic. But yeah, I work with Fridays for Future, which is a youth-led climate organization kind of focusing on climate justice at the center of its heart, intersectionality, and very fitting for this panel that there is no climate justice without social justice. So I work both within the Canadian branch and then the international branch pushing for systemic change.
Hi everyone, so I'm Rachel. My pronouns are she, they. And so, as Palwasha mentioned, I'm involved with numerous Amnesty International Canada specialized teams. So I chair the Business and Human Rights and Indigenous team, and I'm also involved with the Gender Rights and Climate Justice Corporate Accountability team. So we have teams, sub-teams that focus on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and also environmental human rights defenders in Latin America. And so I also focus a lot of my advocacy through integrating the arts. So I'm the visual arts editor at the Matchstick, which is a human rights magazine also led by Amnesty. And I most recently am the new Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei coordinator for Amnesty as well. So I work on cases pertaining to abolition of the death penalty, to us LGBTQI plus rights, and other prisoners of conscience.
Okay, amazing. Thank you all for sharing. I think already off the bat, all of your experiences are super inspirational. So I think that leads us into our first sort of question for this panel, which is, why did you become an activist? And I know this can be a little heavy and loaded question, but if you could just tell us about how you sort of got started and made your journey into the social justice realm. So again, we'll just go in the same order. So Isabella takes away.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually also got my start in climate activism in grade 10, I think it was, joining Fridays for Future Toronto and being a part of such an incredible organization, bringing together a multitude of different voices. And it was through that I got very, very passionate about social justice and about organizing. I think that as a young person, it was really beneficial for me to be in those kinds of conversations and to be surrounded by people who are also really, really passionate about ending the climate crisis and also educating themselves on the various different umbrella issues under the climate crisis. So I began there, working on climate strikes, things like that. Also outside of that, in my school, as I mentioned, as a Macanese Canadian, Macau is a small area off the coast of Hong Kong. And so a lot of our culture is kind of diminishing, and a lot of my work outside of climate activism was working on how to continue my culture in the 21st century. And so it was through that I got very passionate about organizing and talking about things that are very near and dear to my heart. And eventually through that, I founded Bleed the North and was able to really, thrive and meet new people. So.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Isabella said. A lot of the times we draw from our own experiences and things that, we've experienced firsthand. And a little bit of my experiences came from that as well. I noticed, like, as a woman in STEM, there wasn't a lot of representation. And even in, my high school classes, I would go into math classes, robotics classes in classes of 30, and I would still be the only girl. And when you put it into perspective, you think like there is a lot that still needs to be changed, even though we may not realize it at first. And, for me, and I'm sure many other activists too, there was never a really specific point in time when we, decided to become an activist. I know for me personally, I never saw it as something that I could be or get to because, it can be a little bit intimidating at first. But I think the more and more that you expose yourself around people who do get involved in movements like that and do take that initiative, the more attainable it becomes and the more you become drawn to trying it out yourself. So I really urge you that if you're interested in it, make sure you ask questions and try to get involved in some way, because you would realize like your talents and your strengths can really, really come in handy.
Yeah, Isabella and Charlene kind of just nailed that on the dot right there. I was super passionate about social justice for as long as I can remember. I was that little girl in 3rd grade when the teacher would ask for strong boys to come carry the chairs, and I would take like 7 under my arms, and I dropped them, of course, because you've got like a 7-year-old trying to carry X amount of chairs. But that's definitely where it started. Was I was raised in a sort of a home that really emphasized all of that. And so my journey in activism began end of 9th grade when it was actually Earth Day. and I saw a video from the UN saying that we had until 2030 to reduce carbon emissions by 50% if we wanted a chance at a sustainable planet, a sustainable future to deal with the consequences of climate change. And I remember bursting into tears because I was petrified and I knew I had to do something. And I don't particularly like labeling myself as an activist because I believe that we're all activists. Each and every one of you here who advocates and puts their foot down and stands up for what they think is right is, in the end of the day, we're all activists, we're all learning together. But that's definitely where my journey started in. I joined Fridays for Future Toronto, which is where I met Isabella and Charlene. And then I kind of just worked from there, realizing that you're taught your entire lives that not turning off the shower or eating too much meat is the problem. Of course, individual actions are amazing, but it's the systemic changes that really need to be addressed and acted upon because individually, we're not responsible for where climate change is right now, right? It's those massive corporations, it's that 1% that's continuing to exploit the planet. And we're the ones who are responsible to kind of stand up against that and be activists ourselves.
I really relate to what Ella just mentioned about individual actions not being enough. It matters more about the bigger picture, because a lot of my activism also, like everyone else, started from climate justice, probably when I was about in grade 3, with just joining my local eco club at school and regularly attending like tree planting sessions and those sorts of things. And then I got really consumed in animal rights activism with PETA, which is very problematic because I was steered in the wrong direction through different videos and reports like that. But as I started to transition into different forms of human rights activism, I realized that we shouldn't be putting the blame on different people who are specifically also in lower social classes, because climate justice is also really occupied by classist point of views when you look at what veganism is, and also how to live sustainably. So I tried to change my equity lens and my worldview of what it means to be an activist and how to live sustainably, and to conserve our planet. But later on, as I was surrounded by too many STEM kids for my liking, I lost interest in that. And so I started to become a gender rights activist with this organization called Zonta International. So we would focus on gender-based violence, so that whether that be honor killings, early child marriages, and things like that. And I just realized that I've been storing a lot of anger and frustration for all of my life, and I felt like I was so vulnerable and I couldn't do anything. So just through finding different outlets where I could express myself and at least contribute a little bit, knowing that I can create some change, that really reassured me that I could go down a path where I'm happy with myself and I can make other people feel better, and just simple things like that. Just using my own privilege as a platform to amplify other voices and ensuring that everyone has an equal chance at life.
Thank you. I think that was all 4 of your answers were absolutely beautiful, and thank you for telling us a little bit more about like your journey and how you started activism. And all of you mentioned how young you are when you even took the first step into getting involved within, whether it was like climate activism or wherever you land in the social justice realm. And so congratulations on all the amazing things you've done at such a young age as well. And I think that I know a lot of you mentioned that being young, you came to that realization at a pretty young age that, okay, this is when I want to get involved and this is what I want to get involved in. So why do you think it's important for young people to become involved in the social justice realm? And why was it important for you personally to even get involved at the points at which you did?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's very interesting how we all started in climate activism. I think that that's telling, honestly, in terms of answering this question of why youth should get involved. Unfortunately, a lot of the issues that we're advocating like for or against are issues that are specifically pertaining to our lives and our futures, which is why I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone, but that's why I got involved in climate activism to begin with, because I knew that this was something that I could not just stand on the side and not participate in any sort of way. And I also really resonate with what Ella said in terms of like none of us we're all activists. None of us are doing more or less than another for a cause. Like, if you are taking the opportunity to educate yourself, or even participate in something like this and listen to the voices of others, that is activism in and of itself. And I know specifically in talking about my experience with Bleed the North, like, we don't want to be doing what we're doing. We want these problems to be solved, you know, like, we shouldn't be doing what we're doing, but we feel the need to. And so I think that's a really important distinction to make. So in terms of why young people need to get involved, it's because these are things that are going to impact the rest of our lives, and things that we have the opportunity and privilege to take part of now. And I also think that activism doesn't just mean going on the streets and protesting. It means participating in webinars like this and listening and learning. In Bleed the North, like, there's so many different ways that I think people kind of pigeonhole activists into speaking or like hearing like only a type of person. But there are so many people who are like STEM kids, or in business, or in completely unconventional ways of thinking, that are a part of Bleed the North and are considered activists. You don't only need to look like the people that you see on this panel to consider yourself an activist. By listening, by doing anything that you can, even on social media, like, that is, you know, participating in your community and being an activist. So you are all taking the first step already.
Yeah, I would say definitely for me too. It started with climate activism because that was what was the most accessible to me at the time. I'm sure like most elementary schools had an eco team. It was easy to join. It taught you a lot about climate change, and it was something that you could get involved in and then learn about other movements from there. But what I really, really liked about how I was able to start activism was that you know, you really see how like intersectional these movements are, and kind of like what Ella was talking about in the beginning. All of these movements really intersect in a way that is really beautiful sometimes, because we can realize how much we have in common, and also how we're all working towards the same common goal of equality and justice and social change. But yeah, I also really, really liked how Rachel mentioned that, you know, when we look at our earlier activism, sometimes I see flaws in my activism too. And, you know, as I keep growing, I realize a lot of the times, a lot of organizations may steer you in the wrong way, or, you know, they'll try to use youth activists as like a marketing scheme to sell a product and things like that. There's a lot of really scary holes that you can fall down. So really just keeping it in mind and looking again at that big picture of what is the goal here? Am I helping the right people that I want to help? Is my activism actually intersectional? Am I including all of the voices that I want to include? Is everybody being heard? Am I listening to every perspective? Just really taking the time to reflect on yourself really helps you grow from, you know, somebody who's like just starting out and maybe a little bit misdirected to, you know, somebody who's being a really good leader and really taking the time to make sure that their activism is sustainable and long lasting.
Yeah, oh my goodness. Charlene and Isabella are just taking everything away. Yeah, I think that like I really, really resonated with what Isabella said about we don't want to be doing this. I'm 17, right? I don't enjoy spending every spare hour I have when I'm not working or at school on Zoom, right? I don't enjoy being slandered by politicians online. I'm blocked by our prime minister, okay? Like, I can't even speak to him about this, right? I don't enjoy having to advocate for this constantly. But we are not responsible, our generation, we're not the ones responsible for climate change, right? We didn't cause this. We didn't cause the global warming rate. We didn't cause the carbon emissions. We didn't cause, you even notice in the weather this summer, right? It's been so erratic. There's an explanation behind that. It's scientific. We didn't cause that, but we are also the last generation that's going to be able to make a change, and we are the generation that's going to make that change. And a lot of my activism relates back to what I was as a child and who I was as a really little girl, and I want that for the future generations. Because you think about it, at the rate we're going right now, every child in every children's book, every character in every children's book, elephant, bear, polar bear, rhino, all of that, they're going to be gone, right? Our childhoods, they're going to be eradicated for the future generations as well, and anything else to come. And it's not enjoyable sometimes. I'm going to be honest with you, like being on the forefront of a lot of these movements. it's not something that's super exciting, but it's also something that human beings, we are meant to be social creatures. We're meant to be together. And a lot of my experiences in this movement, I've definitely felt as though I've become a lot more stoic to kind of deal with the backlash that's been thrown at me and all that. But I've recently been kind of coming back to that, that core center of the child in me, because you do lose your childhood really fast when you get thrown into movement so quickly like this. But it's all about that intersectional love at the end of the day, and we can't do it alone. Like I said, you're all activists here, each and every one of you who's listening or speaking or just participating in any way. You're all activists, and we need you in this movement. We really, really do.
I'm really blown away by what Ella just mentioned, everything that even Isabella and Charlene went on about. I also really resonate with how we were saying that we're all activists doing this and doing anything. So I like to put together education and action as a package for activism. So as all of the attendees being here today learning about your future career, you're being activists for your future. And so I think this also correlates to my childhood, the way that I placed superheroes or vigilantes on a pedestal. Technically, we are fulfilling that role because when you look at how the police and law enforcement function, they're not doing anything. They're actually contributing more harm than good. And so now I get to live my dream that I had when I was an 8-year-old girl obsessed with Batman, legally fighting for what I believe is right and what is justice. And so when you're fighting for what you think is ethical or moral alongside people who share those same values, it can help build your confidence and develop your sense of self. And that's really helped me. Within the past 2 years, I've been able to cut off a lot of old friends who started to show their true colors, a lot of misogynists, a lot of ableist and homophobic teenage boys at my high school. And so by associating with more people who support me and also want to share the same pathway of, I want to try and abolish the prison industrial complex, things like that, and people who don't try to make fun of girls who are playing certain sports or people dressing a certain way, it helps reassure you that being an activist does have some good parts to it and that it's not completely taxing. There's benefits, that there are disadvantages, but in the end, you're going to be learning with a bunch of other people and you're going to be going through it together.
Amazing. Thank you for all of your responses. I know that I certainly had moments of reflection there while listening to you, and to speak about why our generation, even at this age, can really make a difference and reflect on our own individual activism. And with that being said, I want to kind of talk a little bit about this notion that, young people don't know what they're talking about, or the constant rejection you may face just because of your age. And I think we can all agree that at some point in our life, we felt shut down or ignored just because we're under a certain age. And we all know that that's extremely unfortunate. And whether that be within climate activism or human rights, period poverty, or any sort of facet of the social justice realm, how do you experience having tough conversations with people in positions of authority, or those who aren't even educated enough about the issues that you're fighting for? So how do you face that constant notion of, oh, young people don't know what they're talking about?
It's tricky, especially like in youth-led organizations, when everyone around you is your age, and then all of a sudden you're kind of put in front of somebody who does not recognize or does not think that what you're doing is of any importance. It's definitely tricky to hear. I think in terms of Bleed the North specifically, we like to adopt a call in, not call out model, because we recognize that a lot of the people that we're talking to, like stakeholders, politicians, things like that, who are much older than us, like don't necessarily know or aren't coming from the same place that we are. And so we want to take the opportunity to educate them and lend out a hand and have them support our movement in a way that brings everybody together and allows everybody to be on the same playing field, because it's not their fault that they didn't get the same opportunities of education that we have at such a young age. Especially like gender inclusive language is something that we are real champions of at Bleed the North, not saying woman, not saying feminine hygiene products, but instead saying menstruators or people with periods or just period products, removing the aspect of femininity with menstruation whatsoever. And that's something that a lot of the older generations haven't really like heard before, and it's not their fault that they haven't heard it before. It's just important that you correct them like kindly and graciously, and so that we can all move forward together and continue educating others. And I think that that's a really important way to go about those conversations.
Yeah, I absolutely love this question because I think it's something that, you know, as young people, we hear all the time. We hear people who are telling us, you know, we don't believe what you're saying, or we think that you're uneducated. We think you think a certain way. I know recently, a lot of the times that I'm having conversations with adults, they'll be like, oh, are you one of those cancel culture people? And they view activism as something that has to be like difficult or getting in the way of their normal daily life. But what they don't realize is that activism goes so much deeper, and it tries to focus on the core issues that we have in our society. So I think one thing that I've tried to do is honestly try to just keep pushing forward. And you know that you're educated, you know that you know a lot about this topic that you're advocating for. So it'll show for itself. You just need to remember to be confident in, you know, your own knowledge and your own intelligence. And when you have that sense of confidence, and when you are okay with your knowledge and your intelligence on this topic, they will realize it too. And they will come to terms with the fact that your opinion, your perspective is valid, and they need to hear you. But really, like, knowledge is power. And especially in cases like this, when people undermine you, it really, really shows through.
Yeah, absolutely. I love all these points. Oh my gosh, so much fun. I think that the biggest thing as a youth activist that you kind of have to just accept is that you're going to be shot down a lot. And, you know, there's going to be a lot of questions from adults. There's going to be a lot of questioning from adults, a lot of statements, you're too young to know what you're talking about. But lived experience is expertise, right? And we are living the experience of what we're advocating for at the end of the day. And there's a big difference that I've personally noticed between intelligence and wisdom, right? Intelligence speaks and then wisdom listens. And we're in this situation right now of social justice crises, climate crises, gender equality crises, humanitarian crises, all of this, because we've willingly covered our ears and our eyes to the signs of what's happening, right? And so we've got that intelligence. People are more than willing to speak. We're human beings. We love the sound of our own voice. But there's been no wisdom there, because human beings, we're some of the most intelligent people in the species. We're the most intelligent species on the planet. You know, we split the atom, we've gone to the moon, all of this. But within that, you know, we split the atom, we cause nuclear warfare. We go to the moon, we cause massive carbon emissions between all of this. And sometimes you do have to be, pardon my French, a little bit of a bitch in this movement. You do have to put your foot down, and you do have to say, you know, my lived experience is this expertise in this, that you are living this experience right now, and that does provide that wisdom because you're listening and you're looking and you're seeing as well. At the end of the day, you are an expert within your own experience with that, and that experience is just as valid as anyone else's. And I'm going to give you that affirmation right now, that just because you're young, it does not mean that you don't know what you're talking about. It does not mean that you're less than. Your opinion is just as great as, and you have every right to be able to share that, right? And you're going to get shot down. Of course you are. That's just kind of incorporated into this messed up system that we live in. But even just reminding yourself of that constantly, it really helps with bouncing back, because resilience is a big part of the movement.
Yeah, so it's important to note that no matter how hard you try, there's going to be a lot of ignorant people who are super stubborn. They won't listen to you no matter how hard you try, but there's no wrong in trying at least. You make the effort and maybe you might get to them a little bit. They might hear it again later on and they'll connect the dots. But as Ella mentioned, using lived experience also from my point of view, paired with empathy, just humanizing certain situations can help really translate to them. So I like to use the example of racism. If you were to put them, the person you're trying to explain whatever issue to, you put them in another person's shoes. You try to give an analogy that can more so clarify what the oppressed person or group is going through. And that way you can kind of shape the situation in their perspective, just to give them a taste of what it's like to live oppressed, or what it's like to be this sort of victim suffering from XYZ issue. And just trying to embrace that we're all related somehow through our thoughts and just the human connection, and that it's not about supplying information and, as I think Isabella mentioned, going to protests and things like that. It's about trying to support each other. And of course, it's humanity, right? I know there's this quote about climate justice by some activists in South America who said that we don't know if we're going to be alive tomorrow. And so for as long as we try fighting and advocating, like, we're going to keep doing that. We don't care who's in our way. We're going to pave the path for the future generations and do whatever it takes. So even when there's roadblocks in the way, ignore them. You can try to confront them, but most of the time, if they are baby boomers or a little bit older with very certain beliefs, I won't say what kinds of peoples and what issues, just try to avoid them and go along with the people who are supporting you.
Amazing. Thank you for those answers. Again, everything the four of you are doing is absolutely incredible. And I think the insight that we're getting here is not often seen so much within activism, and is much needed. So thank you for sharing those experiences. And I know firsthand as well, like, putting in countless hours and months and years even towards a certain cause can be a lot of pressure on you as an activist, mentally and physically, and even activism in general can be very taxing. So can you share any times where, you know, you may have struggled applying yourself to the social justice realm, or struggled with your own advocacy, and what tips do you have to sort of overcome those struggles and avoid burnout in general as an activist?
You know what? I'm still learning the answer to all of those questions. I would not consider myself at all an expert in dealing with burnout or being able to recognize that the world is not on my shoulders. I think that is a common feeling for a lot of youth activists, is we kind of feel like we have to take everything on because everything is kind of go, go, go. Especially when you get so involved in these organizations, it can be very overpowering, and it can take over your life. And I think, first of all, having a balance, like a separate life between the ways that you participate in your activism. It's very difficult now because of COVID, although a lot of youth activists were already using Zoom and things like that. Especially now, you're using the same laptop for Slack for activism and also for school, and that can be very difficult. So making that separation is really important. Remembering that you are not alone. This experience in and of itself has reminded me and inspired me so much, hearing from all of these other individuals that like, people have got your back. People within your organization, people outside of your organization do have your back. We're all fighting for the same thing. And so this is not the world, it's not you against the world. Even though it really does feel like that pretty often, remembering that there is a very strong community behind you, and that it is okay to take breaks because your community has your back. I need to listen to my own words sometimes, but I definitely think that that's an important thing to remember.
Yeah, I completely agree with Isabella. A lot of it comes down to knowing yourself and knowing when you need to take breaks. For me, like, I just graduated grade 12, and that was absolutely insane year. You know, you're applying for university, and then you're stressed out about, oh, where do I go? There's so much on your plate at that time. And even when you're in university, there's that transition that's even more difficult. And you constantly have things going on in your personal life that are going to take time. And you need to know when you need to take a step back, when you need to take breaks from that. And you also need to remember that the people that you're working with are not going to, they're not going to judge you for it. They completely understand. They're going to be loving for it because, again, we're all working towards the same goal, like Isabella said. We're all trying to help the same cause. And if you need to take a step back, you need to take a step back. One thing that I try to do is not promise to do anything if I'm unsure if I'm going to be able to do it. I try to look ahead at my schedule and think, I have a really big family party that I promised to go to in a month, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to participate with this or that. Try to think ahead, so that way your team can coordinate and you guys can see where you can put yourself and where you can fit in. But again, taking those breaks when you need to and making sure that you're trying not to burn out. Again, it's difficult and it comes with practice. It's going to happen every now and then, but keep working hard and keep trying it and take those breaks.
I wish I knew how to answer this question for you all, because I am so guilty of overworking myself. We live in a capitalist system where we're taught from, the day we enter the education system that our productivity defines our worth, right? You get punished for not doing your homework. You're marked on your work ethic and all this. And this system, it doesn't work for everyone, right? It's quite ableist at the end of the day. But burnt out people are not equipped to save a burning planet or a burning system or any of that, right? And I think the biggest thing for me is I'm still learning in this movement. I'm learning every day, but I'm also unlearning a lot of that. And I'm trying to unlearn what I'm trying to get to all of you, right? That my productivity does not define our worth, that we are worth so much more than that. And even just take breaks. I know it's so much easier said than done, but please try to. And even just speaking to other people, if you need those affirmations, right? If they don't even have to be part of that movement, but your friends are your friends. Like, if you don't have anyone to talk to me, okay, I'll give you affirmations. Yeah, I wish I had a more put together answer for this, but I'm still learning and unlearning how to deal with burnout and all of that myself.
Yeah, so prior to 2021, the only type of burnout that I dealt with was through academics at school. But I would say the aftermath of the recent in March Atlanta mass shooting of 8 people on March 16th, with the 6 Asian women being the victims, that's when my activism started to take a toll on me. And so I was constantly trying to educate people about why Asian woman fetishization, model minority myth, xenophobia all impact me and my community. But I was also reliving many of my traumas. And at the same time, I was trying to juggle school, other activism ventures, and things like that. So of course I had to take a step back, reassess what I wanted to get involved with, and of course take rest. I had to hand in a bunch of assignments late, but I let my TAs know. They were all extremely concerned for me. And I was starting to actually prioritize my well-being. I was looking at different mental health resources, and I was talking to more of my friends. And I discussed a lot of this with my sister as well, which I don't socialize with her about these sorts of issues as much, but I started to open up. So once you reach that specific breaking point, I think you're forced to take a step back and actually look at what the work will do to your mental health or physical health, how it will affect you. And so you can take the risk if you feel capable, but if you don't think it's going to work out well, then you just need to stop. And so you also need to ignore certain people, as I've constantly mentioned throughout this whole panel, who are causing your burnout. So if there are parents who keep pushing you and expect so much of you, or you're trying to prove yourself to them, then only do things for yourself and don't worry about the expectations that they hold on you.
Amazing. Thank you all for being so vulnerable and open with your answers as well. I know that opening up about burnout, even in itself, can be very taxing. So thank you for all of your answers. So at this point, we do have a little under 10 minutes left. So if anyone from the audience has any other questions, please feel free to private message me them, and I will try to fit them in our time. But just moving us right along, I'm sure with all of your experiences, you've either dealt with or have tried to avoid performance activism. And especially with the surges of, social media activism that we see or that we've seen over the past few years, especially, what do you think, or what are your thoughts on performative activism, and how do you think it can be avoided, especially for a lot of, maybe our audience who are just looking to get into social justice activism? How can they avoid the path of performance activism?
This is a really great thing to be talking about. I think that the entire conversation should be contextualized by the fact that activism needs to be accessible to people. And so it's really important to differentiate performance activism from trying to do what you can and share resources and share information. And there is a difference there. So performance activism, to me, you know best where your intentions lie. If you are only reposting something for the sake of reposting it, and then turning off your phone and being a horrible human being, then yes, you are a performance activist. And so it's important to make sure that your intentions are in the right place. Only you are able to do that for yourself. And it's constant checking yourself, being compassionate with yourself, reevaluating where you lie and how your positionality impacts your capability to speak on certain issues is, I think, really important. But in the end, only you are able to not be a performance activist, and that comes with social media and everything like that. And it's an important thing to check yourself on.
Yeah, Isabella worded that perfectly. I think for me, when I've experienced performative activism, a lot of the times when I've seen it firsthand, it's been, with people in my school who would like repost something that has to do with, a social justice event or something happening or something going on. And then I'll hear a conversation in passing that they're having with their friends. And I'm like, it just doesn't match up. Do you really believe this? Or are you just posting it just to post it and do what everybody else is doing? So for me, a lot of that performance activism that I was seeing happened when, you were preaching something and then you weren't following it yourself. And I think a lot of that comes with, why are you posting something? Are you posting it to educate people who are following a social media account? Are you getting involved in a movement because your friends are, or are you because you genuinely think that it's a good movement to get involved in? What are your intentions? And at the end of the day, do you think that you're following that with your whole heart and really trying to put your best efforts forward? But again, like what Isabella said, it comes down to accessibility. And sometimes it may be best to just take a step back and try not to judge someone too much if you don't know the full story. But again, try to reflect on yourself and see, am I doing what I can to help out? And if not, am I listening to every single voice possible? What can I do that's to include those voices, to amplify other people? And yeah.
Yeah, nailed it. I think that a big part of what I've learned within my activism is that there is going to be a level of performity in any form of activism at the end of the day, especially in an era of social media, but it comes down to your intentions. And sorry, just let the chat. It comes down to your intentions at the end of the day. And there's an aspect of whether it's an individuality or it's community based, right? Obviously, just randomly reposting and all of that, it's not ideal, but activism can be quite inaccessible to some, right? I have the privilege of being able to get myself to direct actions, of being able to block streets, of being able to put up with the noise of cars honking and people swearing at us and all of this. But a lot of people don't, and that is okay. And a lot of people, myself included, we're still unlearning that kind of ableism embedded within the movement, because how can it not be when that's the entire system, right? So I think it just comes down to the end of the day is reflecting in on yourself. And as Isabella mentioned previously, calling people in when you see that rather than calling them out. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people's intentions, and not everyone's, but majority of people's intentions are good. And, I'm not saying going around saying everyone that, yeah, performative activism is great, go for it. But it also comes down to a level of accessibility in the movement, right? That people are doing what they can. And that's at the end of the day, what we need within the climate justice movement and social justice. Sorry, I speak on climate justice a lot, so it's kind of just embedded with my brain. But within any form of social justice movement is intentions and community-based activism rather than just individually based activism. are they doing it to benefit themselves, or are they doing it to benefit a greater movement? And I think that's the big question to ask yourself at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think everyone, they explained it perfectly as well. With performance activism, what I notice is it's mainly just mob mentality or herd mentality, where you see one person post it, then a few more, and then you kind of feel compelled because of the pressure. And I noticed that with a lot of the boys that I went to high school with, when we were posting about a woman who was raped, I think, in Ireland, somewhere in the UK. And these boys usually would spew out very misogynistic things to me and other feminists in the school. So you can see the contrast and the contradiction between their actions and their words. But the way that you can avoid it, I guess, is even just to brand social media activism as performative. Of course, it's ableist because when you look at the different resources that are accessible to certain people, it's just not viable. So you have to look at the other options that can be provided. So like I mentioned before, education and just getting informed, I think, is the first step. So you're better researching what you're trying to learn, what you're trying to advocate for, so that afterwards you can actually go and teach other people, having been educated, without just using some random Canva social media post as your source of information and pretending like those are the most accurate statistics in the world. You actually need to do some of the work and commit yourself rather than depending on other people on Instagram or Twitter.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ella, Charlene, Rachel, and Isabel, for all of your insight and advice. And I think that a lot of our audience and people here right now in this conference really did appreciate hearing sort of like the other aspect of activism. You know, we usually see your work and we see the products of your hard work, but we don't really get to see the behind the scenes. So thank you for taking the time to come on this panel and sharing a little bit with us. So this does bring us to the end of this panel, but right before you leave, if you could just, if all four of you are comfortable with putting any sort of contact information in the chat, or ways that people could get involved with the organizations that you run or are involved in. I think that would be much appreciated. But once again, thank you so much for taking the time. And to all of our audience, we really hope you enjoyed listening to all of our amazing and inspirational youth activists.